Good morning children. Welcome back to the second part of our chapter Control and Coordination. In this part we are going to study about coordination in plants and chemical coordination in plants and animals. So we'll start with coordination in plants. So in the last part you have seen that in animals control and coordination is done by the nervous system, but we know that plants do not have a nervous system. However, we have seen plants respond to stimuli. For example, when you touch a sensitive plant like the touch me not, the mimosa plant, the plant will fold its leaves. The same way, you may have observed a seed germinating from the soil. You see that the root grows down into the soil and the stem grows up. So, how does response take place in these two conditions? The first one, you see that there is no growth involved, just there is a movement by folding of the leaves. Whereas in the second case, we see that there is growth. Movement is taking place with the help of growth. So, we feel that the seedling is moving because the stem is growing upwards and the root is growing downwards. So, from this we come to know that there are two types of movements in plant. Movement which is because of growth and movement which is independent of growth. Okay. So, these two types of movements are called as trophic movements and nastic movements. Trophic movements are the movements which have particular direction, or they are directed towards the stimulus. The growth is directed towards the stimulus. The stimuli in this case may be of different types like light, gravity, chemicals, water, even touch. So we'll see each of these trophic movements. The first one we call as phototrophism. Now phototrophism is movement of plants in response to light. Photo refers to light. So phototrophism, movement in response to light. So in this we generally see that both parts of the seedling will not grow towards light. It is only the shoot part that grows towards light, whereas the root is growing away from light. So this growth of the shoot towards light we call as positive phototrophism, whereas growth away from light is called as negative phototrophism. Now, plants also show response to gravity. So you know that the roots always grow in the direction of gravity, whereas the stem grows opposite to the direction of gravity. So we can say that the stem is negatively geotropic, whereas the roots are positively geotropic. Now, some type of response to chemicals is also seen in plants. For example, you all have heard about pollination, that is transfer of pollen from the anther of a flower to the stigma of a flower. So when this pollen grain falls on the stigma, it starts germinating on the stigma, it produces a pollen tube. Now this pollen tube grows through the style in the pistil towards the ovary or towards the ovule. So some chemicals that are produced by the ovules will attract this pollen tube to grow towards it. So that is an example of chemical stimulus, chemotrophism. Now coming to hydrotrophism. Hydro, as you know, refers to water. So hydrotrophism is movement of plants in response to water. So here also we see that the roots are positively hydrotrophic. They grow towards water, whereas the shoot does not grow towards water. So here is an animation which you can see clearly of how the seedlings are bending towards light source. So initially when there is a bulb, all the seedlings bend towards it. When the bulb is switched off and daylight is there, then they start growing straight. Okay. Now the upper picture that you see is that of a tendril clinging on to a support, and this clinging on of the tendril to the support is also a type of trophic movement that we call as thigmotropism. Okay. Then in the left side pictures you can see the growth of the seedlings. The stem grows upwards whereas the root grows downwards. And here in a potted plant, when it is exposed to a single source of light, you find that the stems will bend towards light. Okay children. Now this is another example. You remember in the first slide we mentioned about a seedling growth. So you can see how the seedling is coming out of the soil. Okay, but this movement is because of growth. Now on the left side you can see the double fertilization event as an example of chemotropism. Pollen grains falling on the stigma germinate and the pollen tube reaches to the ovule because of the chemicals released by the ovule. Now we come to nastic movements. Now we said that there are some movements which uh, do not involve growth, and they do not have any particular direction. In case of trophic movements, you saw that the growth was specific. It was directed either towards a stimulus or away from it. But in case of nastic movements, there is no specific direction. For example, when you touch the leaves of a touch me not plant, okay, so when you touch the leaves of a touch me not plant, you see that all the leaves close. And if you leave it undisturbed for some time, then you can see that again the leaves will open up. So here there is no growth involved. Just movement is based upon the amount of water that is there in the leaves, that fills the vessels in the leaves or not. Okay, so it is the movement of water that will decide, or the amount of water that is there in the leaves, which decides whether it swells or shrinks. But there is no growth involved. So such type of movements which do not have any specific direction, and which generally does not depend on growth, we call as nastic movements. So the response of the mimosa plant is because of some chemical changes that takes place inside, because as we said, there is no nervous system in plants. If there is no nervous system in plants, and if growth is not involved, then how are they responding to the stimulus? So as I told you, this response in mimosa is generally because of some electrochemical changes that takes place inside the cells of the leaves, and this changes will stimulate changes in the cell size by osmosis. So there will be movement of water into and outside the cell. When water moves into the cells, the leaves will remain open. When the water moves outside the cells, then the leaves will close. So this is how movement takes place. Now with that, we come to chemical coordination. Now a question arises as to why chemical coordination is necessary. Now if nervous coordination is enough and it is ensuring proper function, then why should we have chemical coordination? Okay. Now in case of animals, they have a nervous system, but in case of plants, there is no nervous system. Again, in case of plants, if you see, there are many different types of movements. Some movements will be quite fast, like that of the touch me not. Some movements may be slow, like that of the growth movements. So if all these movements have to take place within a specific time, and there is no nervous system involved, there should be some other system that is involved in getting these functions done. So that's where chemical coordination comes into the picture. Now in case of animals, even though they have the nervous system, the electrical impulses of the nervous system have some limitations or some drawbacks. See, it cannot reach each and every cell of the tissue. It may reach up to the tissue, but not to each and every cell. And after each stimulation, it requires a small resting period before it can start a new impulse. So this might reduce the speed, or it might reduce the efficiency of message transfer and response system in organisms. So that is why we require another system which has some type of cells which can secrete chemicals which will diffuse around it, and then these chemicals can be detected by other cells receptors, and if need, the cells also can further transmit these messages. So if such a system is there associated with the nervous system in case of animals, and in case of plants, just if this system is there, we can increase the efficiency of impulse transmission, or they increase the efficiency with which the message is passed to the cells and activities taking place. Okay, so this is done with the help of our endocrine system or the hormones. So there are plant hormones which are called as phytohormones, as well as animal hormones. So if we see the general characteristics of hormones, they are called as chemical messengers. They are small molecules that are secreted by the endocrine glands, and the glands are called as endocrine because they do not have any specific ducts to transport them. They just simply release them into the blood, and blood is the one that transport it to the target organ, or the organ where the reaction has to take place, or where the effect has to take place. Now, generally they will be produced only in small quantities, because if the amount is less or the amount is more, it can lead to disorders. So only in very small quantities it will be produced. and it will not act on any type of cells, it will only act on specific cells. The action of the hormones is very specific. It will act only on the particular cells for which it is destined. Okay, so whatever cells, tissues or organs that require these hormones to act, we call them as the target sites. So the hormones will show their effect only on target sites. Another aspect is that they are generally slow in action, but they have long lasting effects. So even though they are slow in action, it does not mean that our impulse transmission efficiency will be hindered, because it just has to transmit around a small area around the cells. Okay, so first we will see plant hormones. Plant hormones, they help in the growth, development and response to environment of plants. And almost you can say all activities of the plants are controlled and coordinated by these hormones. Since they are found in plants, we call them as phytohormones. Phyto refers to plant. Okay, so these are organic chemical substances produced by the plant body, which helps in their growth, development and response to the environment. So in plants also, these are produced in some parts of the plant body in small quantities. Their blood is not there, so either through the xylem or phloem it will be diffused or translocated to the other parts. Okay, so we will see the different types of phytohormones and their functions. Now the most important phytohormone in plants, or which very commonly is talked about, is auxins. Okay, auxins can be called as the growth hormones of plants. Now generally you may have all seen bending of plants towards light. Yes, how does this bending take place? We mentioned about the bending in phototropism. So why do shoots bend towards light, or how do shoots bend towards light? Why, we have answered in phototropism, because the stimulus is light. How, we will answer here. See, auxins, they help cells grow longer. So suppose a seedling is there and light falls on one part of the shoot. Okay, so what happens is that these auxins generally they will diffuse away from that lighted area towards the shaded area. So where the shaded area is there the quantity of auxin is more, and you know that auxins make cells longer. So what happens is that unequal growth happens. The side of the shoot away from light grows longer, whereas the side that is facing light does not grow longer. So what happens? This causes bending. Okay, so the stimulated area, cells in the stimulated area or the shaded area, they will grow longer, and the cells that are seen on the illuminated region, that is the lighted part, will not grow much. So this results in the curvature of the plant stem tip towards light. So auxins help in general growth of the plants. Okay, then another type of hormone that helps in growth is cytokinins, because it promotes cell division. They will generally be found in the plants in all those areas where cell division continuously occurs. Okay, especially when the plant is growing in all parts of the stem and all, and in fruits and seeds. Then there are some other hormones also which help in growth. For example, gibberellins. Now gibberellins, they help in internodal growth. Internodal growth means, you people all know that we generally identify a shoot by the presence of nodes on the stem. So there will be some nodes on the stem, and these nodes indicate that the particular part of the plant is a shoot or a stem. So the area between two nodes is called as the internodal region. So the gibberellins help in increasing the length of this internodal region. In turn, it causes increase in the length of the plant. Okay, so stem elongation is promoted. So we can use this for increasing the stem lengths in sugarcane and all. Then all hormones need not be always promotory. Sometimes there are some hormones that do inhibitive functions also. Now that is also necessary for the plant. Okay, so abscisic acid is one such hormone which acts as an inhibitor. It inhibits growth, it causes wilting of leaves. Okay, sometimes it also induces dormancy, that is a period in which there will be no growth. Now why this is necessary is because, see, plants may come across unfavorable conditions at any time. Sometimes water stress may be there because water is not there in the soil. So at this time what the abscisic acid do is, it will close the stomata. Okay, it will induce closing of stomata. Now stomata is closed means we cannot take in carbon dioxide, photosynthesis rate also will be affected. But at that time, closing the stomata is more important than producing more glucose, because if all the water is lost, or if water is not available in the soil, it is very much necessary to conserve the water that is there in the plant. So this is how abscisic acid helps. Then wilting of leaves and all, generally you see when the leaves have completed their lifespan, then if they are removed from the plant, new leaves can develop. So that's why it causes wilting and falling away of leaves also. Okay, dormancy also is induced to tide over unfavorable conditions. So sometimes some conditions will not be favorable for the plant. So if growth is happening at that time, it creates too much demand on resources for the plant. So in order to overcome that, generally during unfavorable conditions, there will abscisic acid inhibits growth. Okay, so this is about plant hormones. Now we come to animal hormones. So in animals also hormones play a very important role. I told you why. Nervous system is there, but the nervous system can pass the message only up to the tissues. Now between the individual cells, and for some particular functions to happen, we require these chemicals that are produced in small quantities by the endocrine glands and secreted into blood. So now we will see some important animal endocrine glands, especially in relation to man. Okay. In human beings, now the most important gland is the hypothalamus. It is seen in the brain, and it is important because it controls the functions of another endocrine gland called pituitary gland, which in turn will control all other endocrine glands. Okay, so pituitary gland controls all other endocrine glands of the body, and pituitary gland is controlled by the hypothalamus. In addition to that, hypothalamus also produces some hormones which are secreted and stored in the pituitary gland and released whenever necessary. Now we come to pituitary gland. So pituitary gland was also called as master gland. It is called master gland because it is like the president. It controls all the other endocrine glands. Okay, so it controls them in a sense that it stimulates them to produce their secretions whenever necessary. It stimulates them to stop producing hormones when the level of hormones rises in blood. So that's why we call it as a master gland. In addition to controlling other endocrine glands, pituitary gland also produces some hormones. For example, our growth hormone. So in our world, you people may have seen small people, that is dwarfs, as well as giant people, people who are very tall. Okay, most of the people will have an average height, but sometimes there are people who have restricted growth. They are called as dwarfs, and some whose growth is over and they will have too much height. So now the growth is controlled by a hormone that is called as growth hormone, which is secreted by the pituitary. So if the growth hormone is not produced in enough amounts, this can cause dwarfism, that is reduction in height, and if it is produced in huge amounts, then it can lead to gigantism, or that is too much height. Then another important gland of our body is thyroid gland. Now thyroid gland is important because now thyroid gland is located in your neck region, and this is important because this involves metabolism of carbohydrates, fats and proteins. So our basal metabolic rate, our activities of the body or the whole metabolism of the body is controlled by this thyroid gland with the help of a hormone that is called as thyroxine. Okay, thyroxine is produced by the thyroid gland. Now, production of thyroxine requires iodine. So you all may have been used to seeing advertisements in television asking you to use iodized salt. Nowadays it's not seen much, but even in your homes, if you ask your mothers, they will tell you, you use iodized salt. Okay, that is salt containing iodine. So even in seafood you have large amounts of iodine. Those people who take fish, shellfish or any other seafood, there is a lot of amount of iodine in seafood also. So why is iodine necessary in our diet is because the production of thyroxine requires iodine. So if iodine is not produced, the thyroxine is not produced in enough amounts, it will lead to a disease that is called as goiter. You may have seen people with swollen necks. Okay, so this swollen necks is actually a symptom of the disease goiter, and that is because of insufficient thyroxine. And if thyroxine is not there, one reason for that can be this deficiency of iodine. So that's why people should take iodized salt. Another important endocrine gland is the pancreas. Now the pancreas produces a hormone that is called as insulin. If this hormone is deficient in our body, it will lead to a disease that is called as diabetes. Now insulin hormone, the function of insulin hormone is that it controls our blood sugar level. What happens is that whenever you take food, digestion takes place and the digested food is absorbed in the intestine, taken to the liver. So in the liver, the excess glucose is converted into a storage form that is called as glycogen. So this insulin hormone only generally stimulates this conversion of excess glucose to glycogen. Suppose if insulin is not produced in enough amounts, then it leads to the glucose not being converted to glycogen, and we will be able to see the presence of this glucose in blood. Okay. Once glucose is converted to glycogen, there is one more hormone that is produced by pancreas. It is called as glucagon. The glucagon will stimulate the conversion of glycogen back to glucose whenever we require. Okay, so both conditions are there, but it is when this insulin hormone is not there, then it leads to diabetes, which is a common disease you may have heard of. Now another very important gland is the adrenal gland. Okay, adrenal gland produces a hormone that is called as adrenaline, which is also called as the emergency hormone. Okay, this helps us in three things: fight, flight and fright. Okay, so adrenaline hormone generally is produced in three conditions: flight, fright and fight. So whenever you are running away from something, or if you are fighting with somebody, or in these conditions generally we see that the adrenaline hormone is released in more amounts. What it does is it regulates our heartbeat. So it increases the blood flow, it increases the output of blood so that more oxygen supply is available to the muscles. In addition to that, the other systems like digestive tract and skin and all, there the muscles will be there, around them small arteries will be there. All these arteries will contract and blood flow will decrease there, and all this blood flow will be directed towards the muscles so that muscles can take action. Okay, and in order to ensure that oxygen supply is continuously available, at that time our breathing rate also will increase. Okay, so all in all, it produces a condition in the body where we become more active, we become more alert, there is more amount of oxygen in our blood, and our muscles will be able to work to protect us from whatever emergency is there that we are facing. Now finally, another set of endocrine glands are the gonads. Gonads are nothing but the sex organs, the testes and the ovaries. Their main function is actually to produce the gametes, that is the sperm and the ovum. But in addition to producing these germ cells or gametes, they also have endocrine function. The testis secretes testosterone hormone, which will control all the secondary sexual characteristics in males as well as the process of sperm formation. In females, the ovaries produce two types of hormones, estrogen and progesterone, which also controls the sexual characteristics, that is the secondary sexual characteristics as well as the menstrual cycle, as well as all the functions that are associated with puberty. Okay children, so this is all about the endocrine glands in animals. There's one more small thing that you people should know, that is feedback mechanism. See, when we talked about endocrine glands, we told that it produces chemicals in small quantities. Now these quantities are very specific. If more amount of the hormone is produced, it may cause problems. For example, you saw that when the growth hormone is produced in more amounts, it causes gigantism. Then if suppose the hormones are not produced in enough quantities, that also will create trouble because it may lead to disorders. For example, goiter, okay, dwarfism, etc. So there is a very efficient feedback system maintained in our body. That is, whenever the endocrine glands are producing the hormones, if the level of the hormone increases or decreases, this message will be sent to the brain, which will stimulate the hypothalamus to either to direct the pituitary gland to guide the endocrine glands as to either stop production or to increase production. For example, If suppose the levels of insulin falls in the body, okay, more amount of glucose will come in blood, means immediately this will stimulate the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary to stimulate the thyroid gland. Okay, so the thyroid gland again it will to stimulate the pancreas to produce the insulin, and this insulin will be released into blood and the glucose will be converted into glycogen. Okay, the same way, if some hormone is excess in the blood, then again this will stimulate the hypothalamus, which will stimulate the pituitary, and the pituitary gland will ask the particular endocrine gland to stop producing the hormone. So in this way, a feedback mechanism is regulating the action of the hormones at all the times. So children, this is all about control and coordination. Hope you have understood.